فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد. So in the last lesson we were discussing the Eemaan in the decree, and in this lesson now the next question that comes up is regarding Eemaan in the day of judgment. السؤال الخامس عشر: ما حد الإيمان باليوم الآخر وما الذي يدخل فيه? What is our Eemaan in the day of judgment, and what are the different types of things that come into the belief about the day of judgment? What are the different aspects of our belief in the day of judgment? الجواب: كل ما جاء في الكتاب والسنة مما يكون بعد الموت فإنه داخل في الإيمان باليوم الآخر. Basic answer is everything that occurs from the point of death up until entry into paradise or hell, everything that happens in between is belief in the day of judgment. When you die, what happens to you after that in the grave, then the resurrection, the signs of the day of judgment, everything that happens after you're resurrected, all of those events that occur, they all come into the belief in the day of judgment. So, when it comes to this, then you have to make your notes very carefully. Belief in the day of judgment, there are two main parts to it. Belief in the day of judgment, there are two main parts to it. One is, part one is about the Barzakh, and part two is about after the resurrection. Part one of the belief in the day of judgment is about the Barzakh, and we're going to explain about that in a moment. Part two is all about the actual day of judgment happening and the resurrection and everything that happens then. So two parts to the belief in the day of judgment. The first part is what? The Barzakh, and the second part is about after the resurrection and everything that happens in the afterlife then. So, we're going to talk about the first part first, and that is the part about Barzakh. For a person to enter into Barzakh, he must obviously die. So when death happens, when the angel of death comes and takes the soul of a person, and death occurs, because the definition of death is actually what? What is the definition of death? If somebody asks you, define death. So how do you define death? What is the definition of death?
The test world.
The what?
The test world.
The test?
World.
The test world?
Yeah.
But the question is, death, if somebody asks you, how do you explain what death is? How are you going to explain what death is? If somebody asks you, explain to me what is death.
Death is when you lose your life, and when Allah takes away your life, and then He when Allah takes away your life is death.
Okay? When your life is taken away, that is death.
When your soul leaves your body.
When your soul leaves your body, that is death.
Or when,
Huh?
when you are not able to act, that's death.
That's
You know?
true as well. It is true. Because when you die, you cannot do any more good deeds. You've died, that's it. Your chance is gone. So the scholars, they say, to define death in a simple way, it is مفارقة الروح للجسد, the separation of the soul from the body. When your soul separates from your body, then that is termed as death. And that's why in a hadith it mentions something about a minor death and a major death. What is the minor death? Al-Wafat al-Sughra. The minor death, what is that? And the major death, what is that?
The major death is like obviously like
The final death.
it's just death.
And what's the minor death then? In a hadith it mentions about the minor death.
It is when Allah makes your, gives you your, makes your body healthy again and gives you and makes you go back to yourself.
Sleep. It's mentioned about sleep. Why is sleep minor death? Because when you sleep, it mentions in the narration how your soul comes out of your body. And that is the definition of death, when the soul separates from the body. So when you sleep and your soul separates from your body, then that is technically death. Of course, your soul returns. The one whom Allah allows their souls to return, their souls return. So that is only known as a minor death, because you still wake up in the morning, except for the ones whom Allah keeps their souls back, and so they die in their sleep. So the separation of the soul from the body is death. When the angel of death comes then and your soul is removed from your body for the last time in this world, meaning in this world again, now the soul doesn't come back to you. Now the soul will come back to you afterwards in the Barzakh, in the afterlife, not now here. You won't come back to life here again. You know, recently, was it in South Africa, I think? In South Africa or some country, one of the African countries, there was a pastor, like a Christian priest. So he said he can bring the dead people back to life. So there was a man who was dead, and they were doing his burial. They had him in the box, the coffin, and he was dead. And this Christian priest, like the pastor, he came and he's doing all this reading. Come back to life, come back to life, all these things, he's doing it. And then it's on the video. All this is on the video, they're recording it. Then the man, he was dead. He wakes up like this. Then he wakes up and he stands up from the coffin. All fake, they're making it up, all of it. Trying to make the people stupid. So then he wakes up like this and he's doing this. All this like he's come back to life. The soul has come back to him. So then even the other Christians, they were saying, this man, he has made shame to Christianity. He has made us embarrassed. Look what he's doing. Everybody's laughing at us now. So anyway, the separation of the soul, that is death. How does the soul separate from the body? There are two ways. It mentions in the narrations that there are two different ways the soul separates from the body. One is with difficulty and one is with ease. It's mentioned about the believers, their soul exits from their body with ease. That it exits with ease. Just like water flows out of a cup or a bottle when the water flows out, is that difficult or easy? Easy, flows out. It mentions the soul of a believer flows out with ease. Whereas the soul of a disbeliever, it comes out with difficulty. And there's an example mentioned in the hadith, as-suf al-mablul, wet wool. When you have a pile of wet wool and you put a hook into the middle of that bowl of wet wool. Now, if you try and carefully take that hook out of the bowl of wool, what's going to happen inevitably? As you take it out, there are going to be strands of wool that are being torn. No matter how careful you are, you're going to end up dragging along pieces of wool and strands of wool as you try and pull that hook out from the middle of the bowl. True? Absolutely. In the hadith it mentions that as the example of the soul of the disbeliever exiting from his body. That it's like it's being ripped out of his body. Because the soul does not want to leave. The soul desires the luxuries and the desires of this world. Does not want to leave. So it's mentioned how the soul of a believer exits with ease, but the soul of a disbeliever exits with difficulty. So then when death occurs now, the person enters into what is known as Barzakh. And what does the word Barzakh mean? A barrier, correct. The word Barzakh, it means a barrier between two things. A barrier between two things. You have something here, you have something there, and you have this fence in between. You have this barrier in between, this obstacle in between two things. So Barzakh is this item, this obstacle between two things. What are the two things that the Barzakh is in the middle of? Life and afterlife. This world and the afterlife. Because when you die, you don't go straight into accountability and day of judgment. When you die, you go into Barzakh, in the grave. And you wait there until the day of judgment happens. Then you come out of the Barzakh, out of your grave, and the afterlife, the judgment, accountability begins. So that Barzakh is a middle barrier between this world and between the day of judgment and the afterlife and the resurrection then occurring there. You wait in Barzakh up until the day of judgment. And so that is the barrier between this world and the afterlife in terms of the resurrection, etc. Even though Barzakh is part of afterlife. So in the Barzakh, what happens? There are two main things to mention about the Barzakh. When you are in Barzakh, you are in your grave, and you might not even be in your grave. How come you might not even be in your grave? Because does everybody who dies get buried? Some people, their bodies are lost. They never find the bodies and they can never bury them. Some people may die in a fire and there's nothing left of their body. Some people may die in drowning and the body can't be found. Some people may be eaten by an animal. An animal may come and eat them, and so their body is gone, nothing left. So some people are not buried. And then you have the mushrikun and all of their practices where they burn the bodies on purpose, cremation. They burn the bodies, and then you have just the ashes. And they put the ashes in a box and you take it home. No? Everywhere this is what they do. The ashes. They burn the body, and then just what is left, they take it together, these ashes, put them in a box, and you take them. That's what they do. So, not everybody is buried. But that doesn't make a difference. The Barzakh happens for everybody, whether you get buried or not. That doesn't matter. Barzakh happens for everybody. whether you get buried or you don't get buried. So in that barzakh there are two main things. The first one is known as fitnatul qabr. The first one is known as the trial of the grave. Fitnatul qabr is the trial of the grave, and you know about that. What is fitnatul qabr? What is the trial of the grave? We did it. What is it? What's the trial of the grave? Go on, what do we do? Trial of the grave. What happens in the trial of the grave?
Is that before you are dead?
After you die. In the grave, after you die, something happens. It's called the trial of the grave. That's when two angels come to you.
I know. When you are dead, the angels, if he's not Muslim, he has his soul.
Yeah, there are two angels called Al-Munkar and Al-Nakir.
Israel.
And they come, no, that's the angel of death. The angel of death comes and takes your soul. Then afterwards, there are the two angels, Al-Munkar and Al-Nakir. And they come to you and they ask you some questions. One question is, Man Rabbuka? Who is your Lord? Another question is, Ma Dinuka? What is your religion? And the last question, who is your prophet? Man Nabiyuka? Those were the three questions. We studied it before, remember? So that is the trial of the grave. When the angels, they come and they question you regarding who your Lord is, what your religion is, who your prophet is. And it's mentioned in the hadith, the kuffar, the munafiqun, those people when they are questioned, they will say, Ahi, Ahi. They will say, Ahi, like this kind of sound. Meaning that they will say, Kuntu asma' an-nas yaquluna shay'an faqultuh. I used to hear the people saying something and I said it. They weren't believers, they weren't mu'mineen. They weren't upon understanding of who their Lord is and who their prophet is and what their religion is, and they didn't care about that. So they will not be able to answer those questions. But the believers, then Allah makes them firm to answer those questions. The people of Eemaan. And the ayah in the Quran which proves that, يثبت الله الذين آمنوا بالقول الثابت في الحياة الدنيا وفي الآخرة. That Allah makes them firm, the people of Eemaan, with an upright statement in this world and in the afterlife. When does Allah make you firm in the afterlife? In the questioning of the grave. That's what the ayah means. How do we know that's what the ayah means? Because there is a hadith where the Prophet ﷺ said that's what the ayah means. We have tafsir from the Sunnah telling us that this ayah, it means Allah will give you firmness, uprightness, strength when it comes to the questioning of the grave. So that is fitnatul qabr. There are some issues about fitnatul qabr. Firstly, what is the evidence for it? Somebody says to you, okay, fitnatul qabr, give me the proof. What is the proof that this fitnatul qabr happens? What is the proof that this questioning of the grave happens? So then what are we going to say? Which one?
Person when buried will be to enter the house.
There is the hadith, there are narrations. The hadith about the two angels, they come. Al-Munkar and Nakir, the two angels, that's the names given for them in the hadith. And it mentions, there are more than one hadith. And they come and sit the person up and they ask him those questions. There are hadith in the Sunnah clear about fitnatul qabr, about the trial of the grave happening, about the angels questioning that person. There are multiple narrations. Hadith, say, even telling you the name about Al-Munkar and Nakir, even telling you what they look like. In the hadith it tells you what Al-Munkar and Nakir look like. What does it say about what they look like? It mentions in the hadith that they are aswadani azraqani, or azraqani aswadani. that they come in a black and blue appearance. They come in a black and blue appearance. Doesn't mention any more details, but it just mentions they have black and blue in their appearance. Then also, are there people who are not going to get the fitnatul qabr, or does everybody get fitnatul qabr?
There are some people like the people who are the people who die in jihad, they don't get access, they don't get.
So the shuhada.
Yeah.
So the martyrs, you're saying, do not get the trial of the grave. What's your evidence? What's your evidence that the martyrs do not get the trial of the grave? Hmm? Yeah, but what's the evidence that they do not get fitnatul qabr? There is one hadith, I think in a Tirmidhi, where a man came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said to him, Ya Rasulullah, ما بال المؤمنين يفتنون في قبورهم إلا الشهيد. How come the believers, they all get the trial of the grave except for the martyr? So the Prophet ﷺ said, كفى ببارقة الصيوف على رأسه فتنة. It is sufficient as a test that the swords, the clanging of the swords, the striking of the swords occurred upon his neck. That is enough as a test for him. The one who is upon sincerity a martyr. So it shows that the one who sincerely was a martyr, the Prophet ﷺ is saying that was enough of a test for him. And so there will not be the trial of the grave. Who else is exempt? Who else is exempt from the trial of the grave?
People that die upon without stomach.
That's something different. We're going to come to that soon.
They drown.
That's different too. Trial of the grave. Also, the prophets and the messengers, they will be exempt from the trial of the grave for two reasons. One, are prophets and messengers higher level, superior to the shuhada or not?
Yes.
They are. So if the shuhada are exempt, the prophets and messengers are going to be exempt. They are higher level, superior, higher status than the shuhada. And if the shuhada are exempt, they're not going to get trial of the grave, then the prophets and messengers are not going to get the trial of the grave. Second reason,
Because one of the questions in the trial of the grave is, who is your prophet?
that's something the scholars have mentioned. One of the reasons possibly is because in the questioning, one of the questions is, who is your prophet? And obviously the prophet himself is the prophet. He himself was the prophet and messenger. So it doesn't make sense that he's going to be asked, who was your prophet and messenger? He was him. He was the prophet and messenger. So they mention that the prophets and messengers are exempt from the trial of the grave also. This one, children below the age of puberty, are they exempt? Possibly. Possibly that they are exempt. And for example, the ghair mukallaf, like the majnoon, the one who didn't have his mental faculties. But those topics, they're going to come up more in adhab al-qabr, and the people who are exempt from the punishments of the graves. Also,
The guardian of the borders.
no? The one who dies on the night of Friday, which we call in English Thursday night, because the night comes before the day. There is a hadith about the person who dies on a Thursday night, which is known as the night of Friday Islamically, that he is exempt from what? It's mentioned also the punishment of the grave too. That the one who dies, and this is a hadith which some scholars they say it's authentic, as Shaykh Al-Albani says it is authentic. Some scholars they dispute whether that narration is authentic, but as Shaykh Al-Albani mentions it is authentic, the one who dies on the night of Friday. The stomach one we'll get to in the punishment of the grave. So that is the trial of the grave, that is the first thing. The second thing is the punishments and the blessings of the grave. The punishments and the blessings of the grave. Because when a person is in the grave, in the life of the Barzakh, then you're either going to be in punishments or you're going to be in blessings. You're either going to be in punishments or in blessings. So, what is the evidence for that first? The evidence that there are punishments and blessings in the grave? Evidence. Ayah or hadith? النار يعرضون عليها غدوا وعشيا ويوم تقوم الساعة أدخلوا آل فرعون أشد العذاب. How is this evidence? How do we know that? النار. So they say النار, they're in the fire. يعرضون عليها غدوا وعشيا. Morning and night in the fire. How do we know this is not Jahannam?
Since then they will enter the fire.
Okay, so that means there is different adhab in the akhirah, and this fire now is different. Because in the ayah too it says, وَيَوْمَ تَقُومُ السَّاعَةِ أَدْخِلُوا آلَ فِرْعَوْنَ أَشَدْ. More severe adhab, more severe punishment. So if there is a bigger punishment later, this fire which they are being punished in now is lesser, then that must mean this fire isn't the final fire of hellfire. This is less yet. In the day of judgment, they're going to be put into the serious punishment, which is the actual hellfire. So that shows right now they are in the punishment of the grave, the punishment of the barzakh. On the day of judgment, they're going to be put into the bigger punishment, which is the actual hellfire then. So that is one evidence about the punishments of the grave. What else?
Hadith of the Prophet when he was in his dream and two angels came down and took him and showed him the people who were being punished. The man who takes the riba.
But these examples, it was as though they were being shown in hellfire. Okay, so there is also the hadith, مر النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم بقبرين فقال إنهما ليعذبان. The Prophet ﷺ walked past two graves one time. He walked past two graves one time, and he said, both of these people in the graves are being punished. إنهما ليعذبان. They are being punished. And then he mentioned the reasons why they are being punished. أما أحدهما فكان يمشي بالنميمة وأما الآخر فكان لا, in one riwayah, يستنزه من البول, in another one كان لا يستتر. That these two are being punished in their graves. As for one of them, because he used to spread tales and stories between people to cause corruption. Namima. When you take stories between people to cause problems between people. That's known as tale carrying, namima. So the Prophet ﷺ said one of them is being punished in the grave because he used to do namima, spreading stories between people to cause corruption between people. The second one, he never used to look after himself when using the toilet. that the impurity would go everywhere. In the other narration it mentions he never used to cover himself when going to the toilet. That he would do it in public sight where people can see him. And that's why it's impermissible to use these toilet cubicles where you stand up in the public cubicles. Impermissible, haram. You're not covered up, nothing. The narration mentions that can be one of the punishments of the grave, not covering yourself up when using the toilet. So that is an evidence for the punishment of the grave too. Anything else? When the angels, in the ayat it mentions, when the angels they come and they beat the people with like hammers or mullets. They beat the people with these items. There are ayat about that too, correct? Anything else? The law, hadith Muadh, or Al-Bara ibn Azib? The hadith of Al-Bara ibn Azib, there's a long hadith. And it talks about all of these details. In fact, for homework, you can do that. For homework, go and check the hadith by the companion. His name is Al-Bara ibn Azib. Go and find that hadith. It's a long hadith. And it talks about all of the events that happen when a person dies and the soul goes up and the angels take it. And then what happens in the Al-Munkar al-Nakir and everything happening and the angels. All of those details are in the hadith. It's a big hadith. All about death and what happens in the Barzakh and all those details about the angels. So have a look at that narration. That gives you a lot of evidences for these things. So that is some evidences there that the punishment of the grave is real. There is one evidence everybody here will know. There is one evidence here that everybody should know, which proves the punishment of the grave, because everybody reads it in the prayer. Allahumma inni a'udhu bika min adhab al-qabr. Don't you read that in prayer at the end? That is an evidence that there is punishment of the grave. Otherwise, why are you asking Allah to protect you from the punishment of the grave if it's not real? So this proves that there is punishment of the grave too, because we've been taught to ask Allah for protection from the punishment of the grave. So, they are evidences that the punishment of the grave occurs. There are evidences too about the blessings of the grave. There are narrations that mention how the grave of a person is made spacious as far as the eyesight can see, and that a door is opened up into paradise and the person can see his place in paradise and the fragrances of paradise come to him. And he says, Ya Rabbi, aqim as-sa'ah. Oh my Lord, make the day of judgment happen. Because he wants to go to paradise. But the other one, where the door to hellfire is opened up and the evil smells of hellfire, they come to him. Then he says, Ya Rabbi, la tuqim as-sa'ah. My Lord, don't make the day of judgment the hour to be established. Because he doesn't want to go take that place in hellfire. So, those are definitely many evidences indicating the reality of the punishments and the blessings of the grave. There are some exceptions to the punishments of the grave. One of them is that narration about the Friday night. One of them is the narration about the person, man mata bida'i batnih, a person who dies because of a stomach disease or ailment. He has some stomach problem and he dies because of the stomach problem, stomach disease, some type of stomach disease, whatever that stomach problem is, and that makes him die. Then it mentions in the hadith, that type of person is also exempt then from the punishment of the grave. That he is also given exemption from the punishment of the grave, the one who dies like that. So, that is the two parts that come under the area of the Barzakh, the Eemaan in the Barzakh. If a person ends up in punishment of the grave, does that just carry on up until the day of judgment actually happens, or does it stop after a while? it carries on. That is the opinion of the scholars, that the punishment of the grave, if it happens to somebody, then it carries on all the way until the day of judgment happens and the people are taken out of their graves. It continues, it doesn't stop. So then after that is going to be the second part of the belief in the day of judgment, which is the actual day of judgment happening and the resurrection. When the day of judgment happens, before it happens, there are going to be the ashrat al-sa'ah, alamat al-sa'ah, the signs of the hour. There are going to be certain signs of the hour showing that the day of judgment is getting close. So what are some of these signs? How can we categorize the signs of the day of judgment?
There are major signs and minor signs.
That's one way to categorize them. That there are major signs and there are minor signs. How many major signs are there and how many minor signs are there?
10 major.
It is mentioned by many scholars that there are the 10 major signs, all of them mentioned in one hadith together in Sahih Muslim. And the scholars, they mention them to be the 10 major signs. What's another way to categorize the signs of the Day of Judgment?
The time. Present.
So past, present and future. Signs of the Day of Judgment that have already happened in the past. Signs of the Day of Judgment that are happening right now in the present. And signs of the Day of Judgment that are gonna happen in the future. There are some signs of the Day of Judgment have already happened. There are some that are happening right now. And there are some that are gonna happen in the future. So what's some examples of signs of the Day of Judgment that have already happened?
That when you like be naked but still comfortable.
Alright, but in the past first. In the past, signs of Day of Judgment that have already happened in the past. Not right now, already in the past.
Last prophet.
The last prophet, Bi'athatun Nabi Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. It is from the signs of the hour that the final messenger has gone. Is there any more prophets or messengers now? No. So that is a sign of the hour. The hour is coming close. No more prophets left to come. No more messengers left to come. Isa alayhi salam will return, of course, but that is not any new prophets or messengers coming now. No more new prophets or messengers to come now. No more new revelation to come now. That is a sign of the Day of Judgment. Other things the scholars, they mention from signs that have happened already. Splitting of the moon.
Sheep herders competing in tall buildings.
That's going to be now and in the future.
Yeah.
In the past,
Like we stop using horses in war.
There are actually, for minor signs, lots. There are lots of minor signs. Many.
The time becoming short.
The time becoming short, it is mentioned as well. They also mention things like the killing of Uthman radiyallahu anhu. Some of the scholars say this was mentioned as a sign of the Day of Judgment coming close. The Prophet ﷺ, when he was alive, what did he say? بُعِثْتُ أَنَا وَسَاعَكَ هَاتَيْنِ. That I have been sent and the hour will occur, and the difference is like your index finger and your middle finger. Your middle finger is slightly longer than your index finger. That is the time left for the Day of Judgment to occur. Do we know exactly how many years are left before the Day of Judgment happens?
No one knows that.
Al-Imam al-Tabari, Imam Ibn Jarir al-Tabari, in his book, the Tarikh of al-Tabari, he mentioned a riwayah or an athar from Ibn Abbas that هذه الدنيا جمعة من جمع الآخرة. That this world is 1 week from the weeks of the afterlife. 1 week from the weeks of the afterlife. A week we know is normally how many days? A week is 7 days. So what he meant was 7,000 years. That this world is going to last 7,000 years. And then the day of judgment is going to happen. Al-Imam al-Suyuti, I think, he mentioned this world cannot go more than 1,500 years. 1500 sana. 1,500. Now 1,440. For the time of the Prophet ﷺ, this ummah, not the world, sorry, this ummah will not go more than 1,500 years. Now we are 1440. 60 years to go, that means. But all of these statements, all of these aqwal, Ibn Kathir, rahimahullah ta'ala, mentioned, none of them are authentic. None of them are proven. You can't say it's going to be 7,000 years. You can't say this ummah is going to be 1,500 years. You can't make any judgment of time when it's going to be. We do know though that the day of judgment is going to be on what day?
Friday.
On a Friday. But when it's going to be, we don't. When Jibreel asked the Prophet ﷺ, أخبرني عن الساعة, he said, ما المسؤول عنها بأعلم من السائل. That I, the one being asked, the messenger of Allah, I am no more knowledgeable about when the day of judgment is going to happen than you, the one asking me. And you is of course Jibreel. So the Prophet was telling him, you Jibreel and I Muhammad ﷺ, neither of us know when the day of judgment is going to happen. That is in the knowledge of the unseen. So we're going to conclude on that point for today. Any questions up to there so far? Next session we'll carry on with the next parts of the belief in the day of judgment. Any questions up to those points so far? Go on.
Like, inside the graves, when angel asked the 3 questions, but what happened if you got the wrong, if you got the wrong answer?
If you got the wrong answer, then that is going to be problems for the person in Barzakh, punishments for the person in Barzakh. If you do not know the answer, the kuffar, the munafiqun, those people will not be able to answer. That's why the Muslims have to make sure you study your religion and you understand and you know what your religion is and who your Lord is and who your Prophet was, so that you are aware of these things. That's why it's important to have knowledge. In the Barzakh, maybe, I don't remember. I don't remember if they fall unconscious and then they are asked again. I don't remember. Possibly there's some narration, but I don't remember. Anything else?
Are people will be exempted from the pains of death?
Everybody experiences some pains of death, because even the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ experienced pains of death. Inna lil mawti la sakarat. Indeed, death has its pains. So even the Prophet ﷺ was experiencing those pains, and he's moving the cloth onto his face and off his face, and those difficulties were occurring at the time of death. But that, the scholars, they say, is a means of purification for you. Those difficulties at the final moments, a bit of difficulty you might experience, then it is a means of expiation of your sins. It is a means of expiation of your sins. There's a hadith about the mu'min dying bi'araq al-jameen, that he dies with the sweat on his forehead, meaning some difficulty at time of death. But that is expiation of your sins and to purify you before you die. That's what some of the scholars they mention. We'll round off there then. Next week we'll carry on with the signs of the Day of Judgment, Dajjal, Al-Ya'juj, Ma'juj, all those things, signs of the Day of Judgment and the blowing of the trumpet and the resurrection.